Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. So we are going to continue our Diablo hardcore journey. Coming off of a really brutal death, as you saw from Gillalk in the previous video. If you guys want, we have the playlist out to see kind of like the video vlog set of this whole experience. It's been quite an adventure, I would say. So yeah, it is time to make a new character. I actually made a new character right after that rip, and I had a few pretty interesting things happen. First off, we're going to kick it off with some butcher action. A lot of people are really curious about like butcher in hardcore because I was doing more dungeons than in my previous run, because now I was trying to actually full complete every single zone. Well, it is a case where you are much more likely to run into Butcher if you are doing a lot more dungeons. And you can kind of see Butcher coming. He's going to be that skull on the minimap, especially if you're doing a familiar dungeon. Sometimes there are some skulls that show, but other times there are not. So, how do you beat Butcher in hardcore? Well, it's pretty simple. You want to have a character that doesn't get just completely destroyed. If you're playing hardcore, you need to have a CC break. And if you're playing a Necro, that's why you'll never see me not using Blood Mist. More importantly, mobs in Diablo 4, when they attack, they actually really need to make contact with their weapon to your character. Now, this was not like this in Diablo 3. In Diablo 3, unlike, most ARPG games, in Diablo 3, if an attack begins and you are within range when it begins, it will always hit you. It's a terrible mechanic, but a lot of people who have sunk like thousands of hours into Diablo 3 have this kind of intuitive sense of how combat should work in a Diablo game, and when they play Diablo 4, they don't realize that Diablo 4 actually has crisp and, physics-based combat. So the best way to beat Butcher is actually just to kind of move around. Don't stand still. If you don't stand still against Butcher, you're going to reduce your damage against Butcher by like 90%, I promise. And also, you saw there against Butcher, we had the bubble. So that is also one of the biggest takeaways that I had from my first run. It was a legendary aspect that I was thinking of using. It's like a 90-second cooldown, 3 to 5 second immunity bubble, and it procs when you are hit below healthy. So healthy is 80% health, and that really gives you resistance against like a multi-hit thing. And the way that I'm going to be playing the character, it's my notice that I need to be careful. Time to stop, be careful, Kripp, okay? And I wouldn't have died. If I had it against Gillalk, I wouldn't have died because it was a multi-hit thing that ended up killing me. So that was a lesson learned. I have put that lesson into practice, and I don't believe I'll ever play hardcore, at least after I find that aspect, because it might be, 20, 25 levels. I think it's a very common aspect, but I don't believe it is one in the codex. So you will actually have to find it, so you want to stash all the different ones that you find. Now, the Necromancer itself, yes, we made another Necromancer. In terms of classes in Diablo 4, before the game came out, I was pretty committed to Sorc. Sorc looked really interesting. The problem with Sorc is Sorc gets like, I think 300 armor on the Paragon tree. The next lowest is like Barb or something with like 2,000. But Barb gets strength, which gives armor, so that's actually more. Then it's Druid, but Druid has percent armor while shapeshifted or while in human form, which is in addition to the percent armor rolls otherwise, so Druid actually gets crazy armor. Then it's like Necro, and Necro has good armor and also good resists because it's an int-based class. And then like Rogue gets 4,500 armor from Paragon. Rogue gets the most armor from Paragon. Rogue. But right now, armor scales linearly, so those last few percentages, 100 armor is going to give you like a massive amount of tankiness. But Sorc just never really gets there. Sorc can't be tanky against high-level content. Now, in hardcore, I think Sorc is still pretty good. You have the cheat death, and if you don't want to, you don't have to actually play content above your character's level, so you can have pretty good armor on a Sorc against same level content. But I rolled a Sorc because I had the aspirations of doing high nightmare dungeons, which while Sork can do, it's just not really fun constantly getting a one-shot after Nightmare 70. I also didn't roll Necro when the game came out because I wasn't sure how minions would work, and I didn't want to end up with a Necromancer with no minions. Not because that wouldn't potentially be strong, I was quite convinced that Bone Spear was going to be a pretty good build, as it very much ended up being a pretty good build. I'm even using it here. I do recommend you play with Bone Spear until at least like level 40 or 50 in any Necromancer build until they nerf it, which they almost certainly will. I just thematically didn't really want to play effectively a Necro version of a Sork with no movement skills or meaningful defensive skills, even though the defenses passively would actually be quite respectable. So that's why I ended up going with Sork. The Sork experience was actually a pretty good one, but I did really feel that Sork just gets completely screwed. Sork has everything in the game possible. The damage, CC, solo playability, group playability, huge group utility, combo skills, immunity skills, really cool skills as a whole that you use in different situations. Every stat can be meaningful, a multitude of builds. But at the end, the one thing that Sork doesn't have is armor, and the entire game is based around armor because armor is completely broken and resists completely suck. So Sork just kind of gets really screwed there. I still had a lot of fun with Sork, but right now I have been leaning more into a Necromancer. Necromancer, especially minion-based builds, have really been a bit of a passion for me, and I think thematically and the way that these builds generally play, Necromancer minion-based builds actually deliver pretty well in Diablo 4, I would say. Again, thematically. And I did have like the ultimate Necro Ring of Mendeln build. The thing with Ring of Mendeln is that it is, generally speaking, your damage. So when you get a Ring of Mendeln, even though that's clearly the best way to play a summoner right now, on one hand, it is a character that isn't really built for summons. The summons are just the catalyst of your damage, but the build is just your damage, essentially. And moreover than that, anyone that's done any big content with that build has been using the bugged Bone Prison. I didn't really go into excessive detail about that in the video. I just mentioned I don't really want to use it because it's definitely bugged, and it's also not very fun to use, but it is very strong. So if you're curious, Bone Prison doesn't normally do any damage, okay? It doesn't even have a lucky hit because, well, it doesn't do any damage. It's just a plain utility skill. Now, you can give Bone Prison damage in two ways. You can give the little sections when they expire or are killed a chance to explode, or you can give Bone Prison the blighted aspect. So it puts a pool of blight in the middle of the Bone Prison. I think for like 6 seconds that does a little bit of extra damage. And blight has a pretty terrible lucky hit because it's over the entire duration. Now, here's what happens when you do that. Like, most people are using the blighted one. So the blighted one makes each tick of the blight, and it ticks twice a second, proc every single lucky hit for Ring of Mendeln. So hypothetically, if you had a skill that had 100% lucky hit chance, if you hit a target 10 times, one of those on average would proc Ring of Mendeln, because Ring of Mendeln is 10% on a lucky hit. So if a skill would proc lucky hit every time you actually used it, you would actually need 1000% lucky hit on that skill. Now, because Bone Prison uses like the pool of blight, and the blight spawned by Bone Prison has like an overall duration, it would kind of mean that like Bone Prison has a base lucky hit chance that gets converted into the aspects that you use, roughly in the range of about 10,000% lucky hit. So, you know, if you really think about it and get down to the mechanics, this is obviously bugged, okay? The minion builds that you're seeing people play are very clearly abusing the absolute hell out of a bugged mechanic. The best skill to proc Ring of Mendeln constantly is Corpse Tendrils when you have, you know, a fair bit of targets, and single target, yeah, like Bone Splinters comboed with Corpse Tendrils, and that's the build that I was using. I think it's not a bugged version of the Ring of Mendeln build. I still highly recommend it, but again, it wasn't really a summoner build. And I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of practice, and you can see me here, this version of the run, even though I'm only level 26, so we can fast forward a little bit here. I am using the Bone Golem. This was a big part of what I actually really enjoyed and what I learned from my first playthrough. This is my second playthrough on hardcore. Is that Bone Golem does really good damage. So Blood Golem has the highest single target. That's fine. It's not that much higher than the other golems, but it's higher. And Blood Golem has the tankiness because you can get the 15% damage you take gets taken by the Blood Golem, which is pretty good, and the use is an AoE, which is pretty good. The Iron Golem has the best utility, even though it doesn't say on the tooltip. The Iron Golem button, the cooldown is about half of the other two golems, so you can use the button more often, and you can get vulnerable and stun. And there are some builds that don't get stun and certainly don't get vulnerable in any other meaningful way. So if you're stacking lots of cooldown reduction, Iron Golem is fantastic for like a utility base, and I'm quite happy using it in the Ring of Mendelno, but you have options. Now the Bone Golem, it has the taunt. The taunt is considered crowd control, and it pulls in the whole screen, so then you can do corpse tendrils and really pull actually the entire screen effectively. Taunt into corpse tendrils, super powerful combo. Now the Bone Golem does a little bit less than the Blood Golem single target, but the default attack of the Bone Golem is a cleave. It actually hits everything in front of it. And I looked at the damage numbers because my softcore Necromancer is like 94 or something. Well, it's still alive. That one can't die and stay dead because it's on softcore. So I did a little bit of messing around. Actually, it turns out that the Bone Golem cleave does about as much damage, maybe a little bit less if you have the Golem node. So the 40% more damage with your Golem on the Paragon. If you have the Golem node, it does about as much damage as all of your Skeletal Reapers. Now, you still want to be using your Skeletal Reapers, but the point that I'm trying to make is it does a lot of damage. It does a lot of area damage. So the build that I'm aspiring to play on my second round here is going to be a pure minions Necromancer. We're not going to build around Ring of Mendeln. I might use it, but I'm not going to be scaling the player damage. So, I might use just if it happens to drop. It probably won't that early, and I just don't have a better ring. So, I'm not saying I won't use it. I'm not going to protest against the ring, but I'm not making that build. I'm making a build that is pure minions. I want pure minion power, okay? Now, when you're leveling, you still want to have Bone Spear. That's why I have Bone Spear, but that's where you're going to see a lot of good clearing from the Golem. The Golem is just doing a ton of damage through and through, and I'm very happy with it. Now, you want to use Bone Spear until you can get about level 50 and you have all your different skill points, because once you have 5 out of 5 Corpse Tendrils, and I would say maybe like one item with cooldown reduction, so either on your amulet or your helmet, you can have near full uptime on vulnerable if you're cursing enough. And I'm going to be cursing enough because the skill that I plan on using is mostly the curse. That's right, I'm not actually going to be using a damaging skill on a full minion build. Now, there's still a number of things that I'm trying to figure out, but I think that I'm onto something here. It is going to be a build that eventually uses the Golem Glyph. So we're going to be stacking Golem damage like crazy. It's going to be possibly Diablo 4's first Golemancer Necromancer, okay? But it's untested, though I have high hopes. And you know how things work. If it works out, if my character hopefully doesn't die again, and I can actually make it into a fairly meaningful late game build, maybe then I'll give you guys a build guide, or maybe once Season 1 comes around, I'll be able to have all the kinks out of the way so I can figure out exactly the most optimal way to play it. But for now, we got to level up quickly. And these hardcore journey episodes are going to be a bit more condensed because, well, we already kind of leveled through up to level 50. So we're going to fast forward a little bit on some of these. It's not going to be showcasing every moment, but I think you guys are going to enjoy it. So I hope you guys have, and I hope you guys check out the rest. We'll see you next time.